This is Ingenuity 7 walkthrough session, November 2025. Today's agenda is to really just give a short update on some of the new features and functionalities we've built, both from a user configuration point of view, but also from a license point of view, which might interest some of our partners. So sort of how we can manage certain parts or certain data sources and aspects of the tool via our license server, and it's really neat. So just run through it. I've broken it into 5 parts with another section. So first section, we're going to talk about the Ingenuity server. So we've got centralized data sources, centralized widget templates, dashboard templates, some new cool things around configuring data sources. Just I'll give a quick update on the license server update. A couple of cool things to do with our dashboards. We have different ways of saving and loading dashboards now. Basket changes, some widget styling, some cool new plots. We have a new tag alias UI with a new preview mode. We've got some great new functionality to do with variables and our event log and some different aspects around that. And then some other sections, we just got a couple of things that I really use at the moment is this on hover icon, which is maybe a little bonus, and our common menu being able to support multiple drivers. Okay, so I'm starting off with topic 1. So centralized data sources. For those who haven't seen it, we have a thing called Ingenuity Hub. If you're a Supermap admin on the site, you will have access to it, Ingenuity Hub, on any of our subscriptions or deployments. What you will see will be different to what I see because I'm on the license server, and so I can see all of our licenses and all the different subscriptions. So I can manage it from here. But one of the coolest things that we've done is be able to do centralized data sources. So for those that have used the tool a lot, you know that you have super advanced capabilities on configuring data sources. We use this configuration to connect to all of our internal APIs to drive your charts, KPIs, your events, connecting to third-party sources, or we have the ability to connect to third-party APIs, like, for example, to bring in oil price and other external things like currency data, anything that's external that could be hit via a REST endpoint, you can configure it in here and then set it up to work with the different widgets. So what's changed? We now have this ability to make something central. So each instance will communicate with our license server every 5 minutes-ish, depending on what we've configured. And that gives it the ability to then pull these data source updates. So for example, the ones that we have started with and work with the most are all of these eigen ones. So a lot of these drive very specific bits. So for example, historian multi-chart and value and write, these are our sort of historian inputs. This allows you to search for different tags in your system, allows you to then chart them, bring up KPIs with that. You can then write back to them. And essentially underneath the hood, if I just jump on in edit mode, is you just have a data source configuration, and then we use that to then configure it to then map out the different inputs and outputs, pass in any API keys we want. In this one, we run a transformation so that it allows it to then work better with our components downstream. But the thing I want to talk about is this replicate to all instances. So what it means is that I can configure a data source template here centrally. I can then tag it. I can give it a group. So in this case, I'm specifying this one's eigen, and it will replicate to all instances. What that means is that in the past, when we would install an installation, that bit was a slightly more manual task, and it meant that if we ever wanted to make changes into the future, that would be something that we would have to do manually. So this is all automated and streamlined. It is all versioned as well, so that then different versions of the code can run different versions of the data sources. The benefit of doing this is it means that all of our inputs to different features use the same endpoint. On different versions of our code, you do have the ability to run more specific endpoints, different APIs, but this standardizes that, which then allows us to run more automated tests against all instances, thus giving a more stable infrastructure and environment. What's great about this as well is that in each of the parameters here, if I just come down to my inputs, you can basically specify whether something is required or not. See these configurable params. So we've got batch size and concurrent size, meaning that all of the bits that might be specific to each customer, that can then be configured on their end. So then if I go to the data source tab, which is what everyone will have access to, obviously in this case, they're all installed. But if I then go to configure, I can pull up the configuration of that data source. So depending on what type of historian we're connecting to, or the type of data we're pulling and the size, the performance of that external source, then we can tune certain parameters that we have set up. So in terms of the eigen data sources, it's quite interesting because it means that then we can roll out new data sources with new features and you as users will interact with them seamlessly. But what becomes really cool is that if we make data sources to third-party templates. So for example, this Brent crude price, if I edit that, we're just querying this oil price API. We specify what parameters you want. So just periods, and I'm assuming that we'll probably do some different mappings here so that you can get different prices. So for example, on this one here, we've specified that the token is a configurable parameter, meaning that if I said I want to replicate this to all instances, it would mean that when you would come to install this data source, okay, so here's a perfect one. I can go install, you can then input your API key. So for certain partners that we have that might have custom data sources that require keys, then they could be configured in here, and then all of their sub instances could then install them. They just need to fill out any properties that one would require. And it doesn't necessarily have to be API keys. It could be like what we've done, different grouping parameters or different outputs to different types of APIs. But what it means is that then you have the ability to create data sources in your own instance. But then what we have is if we think, well, actually, this is a great endpoint that we want to expose to everyone, we have the ability to then make that just a generic data source that anyone can use. And you as the super admins on those subscriptions can just come in and fill out the different parameters. And then those data sources are available for then all the users. While I'm on this topic of central data source templates, we've also done the same with dashboard and widget templates. So this is really cool. So the widget templates, if I just open a blank dashboard, just so that I can give a bit of context to this. So when we configure widget templates, essentially these are pre-configured structures of widgets. These are the gauge ones, for example. So it has all different ways of rendering it. And if I drag a gauge onto a page like so, this is just the generic one. This is what our default configuration looks like. It's quite useful, but it would mean that we need a way to sort of spark ideas and innovation on people to build new dashboards. So with these three dots here, then it brings up all of the templates available. So these are all just pre-configured ones for you. So then you can just drag and drop those onto a page like so. But before, in the past, these templates were local to your own instance, meaning that if you used one a lot, yeah, you could add it as a template that'd be available to your users, which you still can do. But now we have the ability to publish essentially a really nice example set to our central server, which then gets automatically pushed out to all of the deployed instances. So for example, if I wanted to update here, for example, we've got a couple of new components, scatter plot. So if I created a few really nice examples of scatter plots where I might have made the axes a bit tighter or adjust a few of the colors, I could then say that this is a default template. I could add it up here into our central server, and then you as users just have the ability to click on these three dots, and then you can drag and drop, hopefully allowing you to streamline the build of dashboards and allow you to make them look even better than they already do. Lastly, on this topic is we've done the same with dashboard templates. So when you come to create a dashboard, you had this from template option. This just gives you pre-configured dashboards. But again, this was all instance managed. So this is all now centrally done. So if we build really nice dashboards that essentially just require you to plug in some different data sources, then these will be ready to go. So for example, we might have like a wellhead template or like a blowdown dashboard or just oil and water charts. Hopefully with this, it gives you the ability to then work off examples. I know whenever I've used similar tools and previous versions of our tools as a newbie, the best way to learn is working off something that somebody's already done, seeing how they've configured it, what tips and tricks they've used. And then from that, we should be able to then onboard new users faster, as well as new employees at Eigen to be able to build great content really fast. So these are small changes, but I think have a large impact on the tool going forward. For more of the super users, we have two new default parameters where we have this. It's actually this one actually. So use Box Hill base URL. If you enable this, what that means is if I get rid of this, is it means that when you hit /products num, it's always going to use the default URL that you've set, which is particularly useful if you are doing endpoints in Node-RED, as in Node-RED, it will always take the base URL of your instance / Node-RED plus whatever parameters you pass. If you don't tick that, what it will do is it will use our default backend URL. But if you don't want to use these parameters, then one can just continue to work with HTTPS ... whatever one needs. So the benefit of doing that is it makes everything relative. It drives everything off environmental variables, which can be configured in your subscription. So although they might be set deployment level, that configuration could be updated on the fly. So you're not locked into it like that. But what that means is that when you replicate, if you have built all the content on production and somebody says, well, actually, I really want to try a devastating change, you take a backup of prod, load it onto your dev and test environments, and you'll know that all of these URLs will then be pointing at the respective backends. So it'll be pointing at your test Node-RED and your test Ingenuity backend, which is crucial for testing these different types of products, and kind of a side effect of moving things into configuration. Although configuration gives you far more power, this allows you to then keep your production instance production, and it reduces any manual work to map all your content to dev and test, and it just keeps it all working in text. And it means that you could pull up the two systems side by side, make a critical change to your source system or to the dashboard, and you'll be able to see exactly what's working, what's not, and you know that the test is pointing at test and the prod is pointing at prod. The next one I'm going to talk about is to do with dashboarding. I'll just use this one as an example. We've got a couple of new concepts that have come into play. So we have this one called subtle save and subtle load. So those can be accessed via your grid settings, like so. It's the same way that you would access your live mode bar. So those familiar with that, if you want to enable this toolbar at the top, which gives you a time bar, allows you to then come in and out of live mode. So it's just to reiterate, as go to grid settings and then live mode. That's how you control the grid. But you'll see these ones here. You've got subtle save and subtle load. So I'll start with subtle save. This is quite an interesting one. So the reason it's come about is that every time you make a change to a page, you would always be prompted with, you have made these changes. And we've come to the conclusion that there is a difference between sort of interacting with a dashboard and making a change that needs to be saved. So for example, if I update this gauge, I change all the colors, I change its source tag, you want to save that. You don't want to then reload your page and lose those changes. But for example, if I'm interacting with a chart, I might pinch and zoom. I might quickly adjust my axes. I might swap it to raw quickly because I want to gain more insight into my data. I might quickly just add an average to the chart just by right click. These are just me interacting with the dashboard. I haven't popped the dashboard into edit mode, although the chart allows me to edit it either via its own tools, or I could come up here, but it basically allows me to interact with the dashboard without being distracted by a big red banner top left. What it does instead is it prompts you with this small save icon top right. So that then gives you the ability that if you did say, well, actually, I have made a couple of changes that I want to save, then I can then add those in. People might then ask, well, actually, does that not cause people to get caught out? As you're building a dashboard, you then miss out on changes you've made. So the key is that this parameter is probably something that you would enable after developing the dashboard, because I would agree with the point I just made that when building a brand new dashboard, you want to be able to save it. You want to be able to then adjust something and revert it back. But once it's gone to production, then you would be able to enable this subtle save, meaning that then all of the components that allow interaction won't trigger a full-blown, would you like to save this page? And the benefit of that is it does mean that, for example, on a dashboard like this, where I have my chart unlocked, meaning that I am allowed to interact with it, I don't pinch and zoom in to say a 1 second interval and save that, and then the next user would come in and see that. So it just makes it that much more efficient. It makes it much more user-friendly, and you're not greeted with these big banners in your face.
Do you have to be a page owner to make the subtle save?
Yeah, you would need edit permissions on a page.
Okay, so it just works like a normal edit in terms of permissions. So anything in a public space, for example, made by somebody else, one would not be able to make the subtle save either.
Correct, yeah. While we're talking about subtle save, I'll then talk about subtle load. On a dashboard like this, it's probably something that you wouldn't notice too much. So in my live mode, I can specify an update frequency. So in this one, I've set it to be 60,000 milliseconds, which is quite a long duration. But if I had set it to maybe 30 seconds or 1 minute or maybe even 90 seconds, if I've got the dashboard open, it will trigger a page refresh at that time. It won't refresh your whole web browser. It's going to trigger all of the widgets on a page to reload. So if I just Command Shift refresh, you will see, you had to be quick there, I'll do it again. Top right, there's a little spinner icon, but this is indicating that the page is loading. If I turn off and save that, you'll see that you get a spinner on each individual widget. So if I had a dashboard with 585 components on it, you would see 584 spinner widgets. Again, it's one of these features that while you're developing it, it's quite useful. But once something goes into production, you can enable these features to make it more seamless to the user, so that as a user is viewing this dashboard, if they've got it open on a TV or they're using it in a meeting, they won't be greeted with quite a few spinners on their screen. It's just subtly handled in the background, top right, meaning that then the value on the screen does not render the spinner over the top of the value. It waits until that value has been returned and then seamlessly updates that. But you are indicated that the page is loading up here. And again, that is just controlled by your grid settings, and the update interval is controlled by your page frequency, which you just saw there as we're showing it. Each of the widgets then rendered a little spinner. So while we're talking about pages still, I'll just run through a couple of really small things to do with the basket. So one thing is that you now have the ability to just rename things in your basket. In this case here, I've only got 3 items in my basket, but you can imagine if I had 10 and a really, really complex calculation, I then have the ability to then give it a simple name, allowing me to then drag and drop that into content. And then that would work as well with any baskets you've saved. One of the things I wanted to talk about was this ability to, in the past, you could only add historian tags to your basket, whereas now you can add widgets to your basket. Not that one. So I can add that to my basket here. It allows you to drag and drop different widgets into your basket. What that is cool is that if you're building up content across dashboards and you've configured a gauge that you like, or you've configured a tag name with a nice prefix and units, that can then be added to the basket and then and then that's up here. And then you can use that in your drag and drop, allowing you to, again, hopefully streamlining the build of dashboards, reducing the amount of copy and pasting, and then it's all handled up here. So then also if you switch browsers or laptops, that all comes with you as well, whereas it's not in your clipboard, it will go up here. And then it has the exact same thing as well, so that then you can rename different widgets in your basket, you can delete them, and vice versa. So it just allows you to personalize your own experience to the tool. And then I don't have any baskets saved, but for example, if I was building out some process graphics, I might format a nice valve, do the multi-state. I might then add that to my basket, and then that can then be with me while I'm working on the dashboard that I'm building. And then if I wanted to go one step further, I could then add that as a widget template available for all the other users on my instance. Okay, the next thing I'll talk about are new charts that we've enabled. So some of you might have seen them, some of you might not have, but the first one we've got is scatter plots here, the ability to do reference curves. This is something that I've worked with quite a lot in the past, and it's something that we put a lot of effort in to get working into Ingenuity. So in the version 6, you knew that we had scatter plots well, but it was just you could do tag 1 against tag 2. Now here it's more true scatter plot. It works very similar to if you were doing in Excel. So let's just dive into the configuration. So a couple of really cool points is that we now have this static XY data source. So if you've used other tools to do reference curves, is quite often you'd need to create a data set. You need to then spoof your time range, and then you need to plot them raw on a chart, and you'd have to then specify, well, actually, I want this line to only be between Jan 1st, 000 and 00012, and you've got a point at every second up to 12. But here at the moment, we can just drag and drop these curves in from Excel. So you can just come along. If you've got your cuts in a spreadsheet, which they typically all live in, you can just grab those, punch them into this editor, like so. You can then specify your delimiter. It should automatically pick that up. So in this case, when I built them, it automatically picked up that that was a tab. And then I can give it a name, RPM 12,000, and I can then give it a color, meaning that then all of a sudden these reference curves become super quick to build. And then if you don't have to have them live in the dashboard, you can then drive them off other data sources as well. So if you had your curves in a third-party system, or they just lived in a historian tag somewhere and you wanted to plot two against each other, then they can come dynamically from source. They don't have to be manually loaded into the dashboard. But yeah, so then here we've got a compressor curve, a curve for each of the RPMs. We've got a surge, safety, and control line. So let me show how we then can render the operating points on there. If I scroll down, the data source that's quite familiar with many people. So we've got historian multi-chart. So for this chart, this dashboard here, it's just complete mock data. It's all simulated. For example, I'm simulating the volume flow and my polytropic head. So I've got a number around 13,000 oscillating at 1500, and then a head of 175 oscillating at plus or minus 5. And then what I can do is that on here, I can then specify what it's connected to. So I'd add them both as inputs to the chart, and then I specify that actually I want to plot this one against this one. So you can see here, I've said actually this is my X value, this is my flow, and then this is my Y. And then this then gives you your operating point. Before I jump in, I'll just explain one other thing. So when you hit historian multi-chart, by default, it's giving you interpolated. So it's going to ask for 1,000 points between your start and end. So in this dashboard here, I'm asking for 3 days worth of data, ending now. So in European time, it's 14:33 and then minus 3 days. But what's really great here is that then I can actually specify how many points I want. So actually, I could say I don't want the default 1,000. I want 2,000, I want 5,000, I want 10,000, depending on the granularity. Or I could specify I want the data in raw. But working with raw data, you just have to assume that your X and Y have matching timestamps. So by working with interpolated, that works great. But if you want to then group the data, so you say, I want each point to represent 1 hour, you can then use the standard group by functions that we would typically use to do bar charts. So I could group by day, I could group by month, quarter, year, hour, minute, and then I can specify my group function. So then I can specify my group function. So it works very similar to if people are used to working with SQL, but quite often I'll do min and max, or I might do average to do different bars. And then if you were trending it on a regular chart, it will give you a point per your group by window, and that point represents your aggregate function. And then you've got this plot at, which is irrelevant for the scatter, but then you would say you want it at the middle, start, or end of your group by window. So in a year, that's quite significant. Start of year, end of year, or in the middle of the year. But if you're doing a day, it'd be midnight, midday, or 23:59:59. But that gives you full control over your scatter plots. And then another really, really cool feature is in here. So you've got the ability to configure how your dots look and feel to your users. So one key point that I really like is I want my most recent point to be yellow, and I want it to be a triangle, and I want it to be bigger. So this is representing the latest operating point. And then my history, I just want it in red, so it will just use the default color here. And then I can have it fade with time. So in another example, I'll use it's got less points on the chart, so that fade will look better. This is obviously simulated, so it's just the oscillation is just running over on top of each other. But yeah, so that gives you the ability to build, I think, almost any XY plot that you would want. You could plot 4 things on your Y against a single thing on your X. You can do all different reference curves, and this is a compressor curve, but you could do pump curves, separator curves, any piece of equipment curves that you've got curves in Excel. You can just copy and paste them into Ingenuity and start using them right away. But in this case here, we're combining an XY plot also with our lines and graphics package as well. So you can use the more advanced charting features on any type of dashboard, whether it be a scrollable report style dashboard or a scalable dashboard. So you'll be able to make these charts look good on either a report style or like a process graphic or an overview screen for your company. Okay, so this is a really cool new feature. In the past, if I just pop up a trend, you've always had the ability to press spacebar on a chart. So I'm pressing spacebar a few times, which allows you to then add markers. They've always been quite static. They just have lived in the trend config. So these markers can now be driven via data sources. So when we're building different solutions, your markers on your trends can be driven from events, which we'll be able to then use going forward. So for example, like a well test duration, valid between, you can do that. And now you have the ability to allow markers to sort of interact with one another. So if I just press this marker here, I have the ability to, one, I can put a comment like I could before. I have this shade option. So I can shade to, I can go shade left or right, and this will allow me to then shade left of or right of a marker, like we're doing on the left and right-hand side of our chart. So we're doing it light blue to the left, light blue to the right. But for example, on this one here, I'm saying actually, I don't want to shade left of or right of, I want to shade between the marker. So shade up to the 18th of November. So it's picking up this other marker that I've got on my screen, and then that will appear in your drop-down list. You can then, of course, like anything, you can configure the color and the opacity, but this is a really neat feature. And the ability to now drive these off data sources mean that they're not manually configured. So when we're building sort of different features, if you're on click from an event, we can then bring up more advanced trends for you and represent that data. So then still talking about shading between, you'll notice that this high and low line. So in the past, if you wanted to sort of draw like a banded area on a chart, you would need to do like an upper and a lower, and then you would go stacked area, and then you would shade between, and you would add one as transparent and one not. Sometimes you could get it looking quite nice, but configuring that could be quite difficult. Whereas now, if I come into my data sources, you have this ability to do essentially related series. So that allows me to say that these two tags are related. I want to shade between. So one cool thing that you'd be able to do is using our window ag function, you could get the min and max coming from your historian as a line, and then shade that as a banded area, and then you could plot the average down the middle. And then that can all be done as configuration. And the benefit of not having that as a default line is it means that if you want the top line and the bottom line of your band to be functions of tags, then that can be done as well. So for example, you could say I want the average times a factor, and I want the min value times another factor, and that would give you your band, giving you full control of how you do that. Secondly, this is representing this as a time. So it's just two historian tags trended over time. You've got our bands shaded left of right of between, but you can also do it on scatter plots. So let me take this out of edit mode, because this one here, I can go back to my previous point in that here you can see that the dots are fading with time because this is a bigger spread. So that was just something I've mentioned, but it gives the ability now to do shaded areas on scatter plots. So if you're doing more complex equipment curves where you've got the semicircles, ellipses on there, you can have that shaded for different colors, allowing you to just reutilize our standard XY component to build quite advanced use cases. I'll just bring this into edit mode just to give people a flavor of how that's being done. So for example, here, what we've done is we've got a static XY, another static XY, and then we're just saying that these two are related. And then that is shading between the two lines on an XY plot. When we talk about tag aliases, so for those that have been using the tool for a while, you probably are quite well aware of the tag alias concept. It's the ability to give a user-friendly name/label to a complex tag, a complex calculation, or even if you just have a historian tag that's got an absurdly long name, you could then rename it to something memorable and unique to allow you to then use that going forward. So the first thing that's changed is on your sidebar, when you click this drop down, it will list you all of the available alias historians that you have. So typically on most of our clients, we'll always run this DB aliases, which is a user configured tag alias. It allows users who have permission, they can create, edit, and delete aliases. And then we have this eigen alias historian. So for certain use cases, we need to manage one of these as code, and it just keeps it locked in. It basically is protected via, it's done upstream. So you just, as a user, you can't edit that. So if I click on this, DB aliases, you'll see that we've just tidied up and revamped the UI. So those familiar with Logbook and have administered Logbook, the admin panel looks quite similar to this. So we've just matched the styling across. You've got the ability to search, you can filter by units, you can filter by stepped. What's coming on this is the ability to see who last edited or created an alias. So that should be coming in a new version. You also, your edit functionality and your delete's the same. But what we've added is, if I pick one that's a little bit complex, how about this one? We've added a new preview option. So this search icon will trigger the preview of an alias, but what I'm about to show is available for all calculations in the tool. So even if you're not in the alias store and you're on any of our dashboards, you can then use this function. So this is a Calc preview. So any of you who've built large calculations in Ingenuity know that every now and then one will go wrong and you need to try and debug it, you need to fix it, and you need to then work out what input to your calculation is broken, what source system's not quite giving you the right data. So in the past, you would take a large calculation and you might go and grab all of your different inputs and add them to a chart, and then you can analyze, yep, my divide is not quite working correctly, or whatever parameter is not quite working. So in this here, you can press this preview button top right. So this is like the classic Calc editor that everyone's familiar with, but this preview icon will then put it into this preview mode. And then down here, it will always show you your final output on the trend, but then it gives you the ability to then include this on your preview. So I can, in this case, it's not that complex of a calculation, but it allows me to then see what all of the inputs are doing on the chart. So I can see, well, if I'm hovering on this, this is obviously simulated data, but I'm seeing a value of 3,000 here, and I can, from this, I can then work out, well, why is it 3,000? For my day-to-day job, the amount of times I've done this at Eigen is to work out why a number is something is a lot. This should streamline that, allowing me to do it in the tool without having to build out a chart to the side. And then this chart here, it's just completely fixed, so it doesn't have any configuration or user styling. It's purely there just as a reference. Another neat thing that we've added as a request from one of our clients is that when I'm building a calculation like so, obviously it operates left to right. So my inputs will start here and I can expand that out as far as I want. But at the very right, I have this one, and I would press user's final output. So when I select user's final output, this is my function, and this is what will get saved to my dashboard. This is what will be used to retrieve the value. Now, if I select use final output here, or if I'm building up a new calculation, I think actually I need to append something else to this addition. I want to then divide it by something. Quite often this use final output will just stay here because that's what it's designed to do. Or I might just change it because I want to preview something. But if I press save now, this is what it would save. So I would lose anything to the right of. But now it will give you a little prompt here on the right, allowing you just to get notified. So it's just something small like that, but it just means that if you're using the Calc editor to sort of investigate and prototype something, then a small information block to give you the insight that what you're going to do is just overwrite something to the right. Typically, it's only your rightmost block, which means it would probably just be an addition or a divide. So it's never too big of an issue, but it'll just give you the ability to see that. Another feature I'll just mention while I'm here, because these are all nicely color coded, that we'll be adding in a future release, is all of these inputs here. Currently, they're just rendered as gray, as text inputs, and you've got different tags within them. So what we're going to do is color code little labels here on these tags used so that you can see where the inputs are, and if you're using multiple inputs across different calculations, which should all go into the same category. This should help you build and, more importantly, debug calculations faster. While we're on calculations, just put this into classic mode. You also have this dates drop down now on the left. So these have been available for quite a long time. We use them internally quite a lot to build out different analysis, but they've always been things you've had to use in here. You'd have to come up here and you would select the dates historian, which then gives you access to then use different date parameters. But now they're as part of the Calc builder. So if I drag and drop month, for example, obviously we're in November, so it's giving you a value of 11, but essentially this is not a Calc function, it's actually a data source plus tag name, but it allows you to then use these in the same format, drag and drop, making them sort of more regularly available. They're in the builder, so hopefully people can start to use them in different analysis and be able to drive the results that they need. So just to run through a few of these for those that aren't familiar. So a couple that I think are probably the most useful for me are is before today, is today. So if you want to build a combined time series where you have production, but a production tag doesn't give you today's result, but you have a forecast tag, then you can then use these in a couple of if statements to then get you a combined flow rate where previous days are sort of what happened, and then today could be a forecast value. So really useful for building out calculations like that.
Are these time relative? So is today current timestamp today, or it means if I go back in the history, then today is where I put my cursor, that becomes my today?
Depends which one you use. Some are, some aren't. So is today, is not today.
Yeah.
Those are what they say they are.
Okay.
For example, month, if you trended that, you would get series from 1 to 12. So if I were in last month, I would see 10, not 11. And day example as well, and your current epoch milliseconds. So those would be relative to what you've set your dashboard at and where you are on a trend. But the example that I use is today, give you is today. So put my page in edit mode to explain this. So what people have probably seen on different dashboards is that we've got this control widget, control group, and submit data. So we've made quite a few enhancements over the past couple of sprints driven from project requests. But in my variable settings here, the UI is slightly more tidied up. So now you have more configuration on the variables that you set up. You also have this user dropdown as well, which is great. So you can then build a dropdown list of all the users in your system. And the main point that has changed is we now have this thing called control groups. So up here, you can create a control group. So this one's called add entry. And then underneath it, you can then add different controls to that. So for example, a control group is essentially a group of variables, and then those variables can be used to then do something. So on their own, they are just parameters in a page. Then they can be combined into a control group. So what is this? This add entry is going to build us a form. So let me delete this one I've created. So then I can come up here, this add item controls. Here we go. So I've got this search group. And then so what that allows me to do is from that, if I then press this add item, here, it's then to bring up that form that we developed from the different variables in that control group. So for example, I can write a comment. So we just do comment 1, number input. I might do this multi-select. This is really cool. I can press submit. And then this is all connected up to our event log API. So this is running the event log write. And then this table is bringing in our events via our event log API. And it's then passing in any filters that we would want. So just a little bit of background to this. So if I come back, I can come to our event browser. So our event browser is our window into any events that are stored in Eigen's event log. If I click on one here, this is a typical event in Eigen. This is just a data threshold check. But you have the outer section of an event, which contains sort of the must-have parameters in an event. Some of them don't have to be populated, but event type, severity, source name, timestamp, IDs, external ID, event ID, which allow different groupings for different features. And then the content here is completely configurable. So to create an event, we just have an event log API, and you basically give it this structure and it stores it. So quite a lot of our solutions where we have sort of this next level of analytics, we then use that to then store the data from these as events in this structure. So we can do like blowdown events. In this case here, we're using it for our event engine to store user limits. So this will then get sent off to the event scanner to send out user notifications. The logbook, which I'll show, also stores all of its events in this format, and any scripting language that we have behind the scenes has access to these APIs and can then create that. Once these events are in our system, then the tool can then be used to then extract that information out and then bring it into different dashboards. So let's open this logbook that I created. This one is just a basic logbook. So those who are familiar with using logbook understand how it works. You can configure any inputs fields that you want for a specific logbook. And then you've got text, number, checkbox, select, multi-select, time select, select from variable, calculate from data source. This is completely user configurable. So the form that the user pops up will then is completely defined in config. There's nothing in code here. And then when somebody fills out that information, it would then populate an event here. But most of you have probably already seen the logbook and they understand how it works. What's cool is now is that this was its own component. It lives in this logbook tab here on the left. If you want to interact with logbook, you had to come here. The data in logbook could be used elsewhere in certain ways, but writing to the logbook had to be done via this add entry button up here. You had to come to logbook and do it, which is a great use case if the data that you need is available to you or it's different drop downs and it's like text information. But if you need to drive these entries from data on a page, sometimes you want to be in the actual dashboard where you need to make one of these entries. With all these different variables and control groups, we can now basically elevate the submit button that we've got here. So when I bring in a submit button here, you can then specify whether it's going to be a pop-up or not. So what makes that really interesting is that if I selected a data source here, as an example, I can then parameterize all these different inputs. And if they came from variables, when I press submit, it would then push that out. But if I said, actually, you know what, I want it to be driven off a control group. So for example, like this add entry and the search, then that control group that I've configured under the hood essentially is driving what's shown on the form. So for example, here, I think I just went through this, but it's then bringing up the comment. So we can just go hello, number, multi-select. I can submit that. It then automatically updates. It's then automatically pulled back into the dashboard via this. And then if I've got a logbook configured here, you will see it here. So I've just added that there. So you can have one group of users, they're working in the logbook, and then you can have the dashboard, which could be more advanced. So in this case, it's quite a simple example on my dashboard. I don't have too much going on here, but it makes it all user configurable. Everything is done within the dashboard settings, albeit advanced settings, but it's completely configurable. There's no code behind the scenes that we've had to write to make this happen. It runs all off standard data sources, which drive the core components. What's also really neat is the ability to then trigger these actions on buttons within tables. So we've got this edit, which will also bring up the form. So I can then edit my entry, just come down there. And then if I want, I can delete it like so. And so then all of these buttons bring up their own modal. It's all configured, allowing you to build sort of mini apps within solutions. So in the past, we've done a lot of event tables where we take, for example, a blowdown dashboard. You've got a history of all the events for a segment. In the past, if we wanted to add a comment, that'd always be something custom we'd have to do, or we need to write a custom API to then add this comment. Whereas now here we can just have a comment button. You just press that, allows the user to enter a comment. It all gets stored in a standard structure, which can then be reutilized in other dashboards. So these events here that I'm saving, you can see they're being used in the event log that's under the scenes. Or if I wrote an event that wasn't an event log type, any other dashboards or scripts would then be able to pick that up and then use that going forward. Yeah, so this is what I was trying to show here, is that on this add item, you've got the control group add entry, and then you've got all these custom features that you can show. So you can set it, do you want to reset the variables? What do you want the pop-up text to be? And any error messages, success message, button color, button size, button text. I'm giving you full control of how this interaction happens within the page. The last thing I wanted to show, which is really, really small, one feature that I've been using a lot, is what you can do with icons now. So in the past, an icon was just an icon. It just lived on your dashboard. Yeah, you could make it do some fun things with multi-state. But for example, if I pick the info icon, save that, I could make it a little bit of a more light gray so it's not so in your face. But then in the options here, I can specify any hover text. So you can do this table is showing X. And then when I hover over that, will show you that piece of info that I've created. I'm starting to use this a lot when I'm building complex charts that are on sort of bigger dashboards, and you don't want to clutter the dashboard with bits of text explaining what it does. You can just add a really small icon next to the header, just explaining that this chart might have a few caveats, or to interact with this dashboard to do this. It just adds a little bit more flair to the dashboards and the ability to make it that much more professional. The last one on the list is just a small one for folks. I find the asset object here. This is our window to the common menu. Yeah, this is one. Let's just double check that's linked. Correct, that's linked. So under the hood in the back end of our application, we have the ability to configure multiple common menu drivers. And this option here just gives you the ability to specify that as default, most instances only have one driver, but it means that if you are one of the instances that run multiple drivers, the visualizations can combine common menus from different drivers, allowing you to bring in different contextualized data from different subsets of systems or different systems entirely.